All right, guys, welcome to the executive chair where we are now doing a live recording where we're going to be talking about exclusive interviews that inspire, highlight visionary nurse leaders, shaping the future of healthcare. Our goal is to inspire current and future nurse leaders, sharing their journey, leadership philosophy, and innovations in the vision within our profession. So I have a special guest with us today that I'm so excited. I was just talking with her in the green room, and I have here, and I'm going to read a little bit of her bio. I have here Dr. Amber Price, DNP CNM, MSN RN. She's a senior vice president, enterprise chief nursing officer of Sentara Health. I'm going to read a little bit of her bio, but we were just talking about some really good things that I think is going to be awesome for this episode. She is recently being inducted into the Fellow of American Academy of Nursing for her leadership contributions to the nursing profession. She got her bachelor's from the University of Maryland. She has her master's in nurse-midwifery. She has her post-certificate in global women's health from the University of Cincinnati. And then she got her doctorate with a focus in change leadership. She's also, these are some of her awards, but they are outstanding. In 2020, she was named the Woman to Watch in Nashville. She's a regular speaker in international keynote. 2023, she received the Changemaker Award from IPC. And then in 2025, she was labeled with BBC Women's Health Global Topic Expert. And she continues to do even more, as in 2005, Female Innovators and Distributors by Kova Biz. In 2026, she was awarded one of the leading business women in the state of Virginia business, and she continues to do so much more in the rural and academic areas, serving her career as a certified nurse midwife. Wow, I just want to thank you, Dr. Price, for coming. And we just had such a good conversation in the background. I'm going to introduce myself to everybody who's watching. My name is Jineen R. Huff. I am a certified registered nurse anesthetist. I am also on the editorial board of the Nursing Magazine. And we wanted to highlight, as I said, nurse leaders. So I am here as a nurse resilience strategist, also just to give you guys, as I say, the tea on what it is to be a chief nursing officer, but also let's see the backstages and the things that we really can learn from them. So I really want people to take a different perspective, because after talking to her in the green room, I think you're going to have some perspective on leadership that may shape and mold you as you continue to do leadership. So let's get started. Dr. Amber, thank you so much for being here. Let's jump into it. Tell us a little bit about you, and we just want to welcome you to the executive chair.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. I love doing these and sharing the real stories, right? And the real struggles that people have and where they come from. I love listening to them myself, so I'll do my best to be very transparent with everybody. And one of the feedbacks I often get when I speak is, that's great, but what do you do? So I will be pretty conscious of really giving examples of real life situations as well. I am originally from Holland. I'm a Dutch girl. Just picture the little braids and the wooden shoes and a windmill, and there you go. Became a nurse and then a certified nurse midwife. I am a home birth midwife. I worked in rural healthcare. I had dreads. I may or may not have a goddess tattoo or two. But that was my passion. My passion is to take care of those in rural communities. Huge advocate for autonomy and patient's voice in healthcare. And through a very interesting career, became a hospital CEO. So from home birth midwife to hospital CEO, bringing that same philosophy of care with me, that every patient deserves to be treated with respect and dignity and have the best possible outcome. Zoomed out each time to learn how to build that infrastructure and to lead teams that drive absolutely phenomenal care. As a hospital CEO, you really get that zoomed out perspective. I learned along the way how to manage strategy and finance and all these other things that I needed to learn through structured education, through degrees, through other ways. And then in the past few years, I've moved on to senior vice president corporate role, moving back into the clinical realm, being responsible for the clinical care of a large health system. And absolutely love every part of that and bring all of that other learning with me to execute that. So thank you for inviting me here.
Yes, thank you. So you said so much there that I was going to say, tell us about your nursing journey, but you've already talked about that. But Talk to me a little bit about what inspired you to pursue a career in nursing, and how did that path lead you to this executive leadership that you do now?
Well, my mother got breast cancer when I was a young girl and in Holland, and she was very holistic. You know, she thought that she could fix things with vitamins and healthy living, and so she really delayed her diagnosis and her care. And by the time she went into care, she encountered a healthcare system that said, "What were you thinking? You waited too long. You know, you're at a point now we can't help you. You have kids," and really guilted her. And that experience was so terrible that she never went back. She never got treated. And so I watched my mother die a really difficult and painful death at home by herself over several years. And by the time she died, I was 16. And I knew that I wanted to do something where I could personally work with people and help people so that they would get a phenomenal hand holding experience, to see them as a human being, to value them, to respect their choices, and to work with them towards optimal health. One of the things that bothers me a lot is using fear to motivate people. That is not a motivator. It should feel like somebody walking your path and your journey with you. And so, how we talk to patients and how we work with patients, and my conviction that that is possible came from losing my mother, who was so scared after her encounter with healthcare that it cost her life, and it cost me my mom. And I didn't want anybody else to lose a mom or a loved one out of fear or out of an experience that got standardized and not individualized. So that's how it began. I started as a nurse. I always knew that it would be midwifery that I would go to. Women's health in particular is always, you know, that's the most vulnerable population I can think of. And that's where I wanted to be, and that's where I wanted to do my work. And that panned out great. I did that pretty quickly. I became a nurse midwife quickly, but I got disillusioned very quickly with the way we treat people in the United States who are pregnant. There are specific cultural nuances that place blame on people who are not perfect when they're pregnant, where there's an emphasis on perfection and all these other things when this is a normal life process. So I actually moved to New Zealand to get a different perspective on how people are treated. And that's really where I found my own core philosophy of how I wanted to take care of patients, just stepping outside of the system for a minute and seeing a different way, and seeing how other people thought about it. And I've stuck to that. I've been pretty true to my own convictions and philosophy of how we need to treat people and how we need to manage the care of patients so that their voice is the most important part in that interaction. And that has stood me in good stead my entire career, because every patient deserves to be seen as an individual, and you can build healthcare infrastructure around that. And I think we talked a bit about burnout. Part of what burns out is that you're advocating and you're trying to make sure that people get the care they want and need and deserve. And the red tape and the barriers and boundaries around you sometimes make that difficult. So being in a position that I am today, where you get to actually decide what those are, that's a gift, you know? And so if you can see it that way, and see that being in the seat where you get to make decisions on how people feel in your care and prioritizing that over what potentially could just be a financial decision or whatever else, that is something that gets me out of bed every day. So still the same foundation and motivation today that I had when I was 16.
There's so much you touched on there, and we're going to dive deeper as I get into the questions. But fear as a motivator, and they do that a lot. And you also talked about, because I take notes when I'm talking, the burnout, what you said, the two B's and the L. I'm going to call them barriers, boundaries, and how it relates to sitting in the leadership seat. So if we want to have change, because you did change leadership for your doctorate, I feel like these are things that are very important, because those are how we can change the culture. And when we experience sometimes traumatic events, I've had some that led more into my nursing career as well, and what really made the passion, the push behind why I do what I do. I think it's important for us to understand what can we do to change it, instead of just staying in the narrative of what was me, but what can we do to change? And I think saying that we need to have boundaries, because I speak about that all the time, recognizing the barriers, and then sitting in the leadership seats. But when you start talking about servant leadership, we need to circle that one back, because I think that's going to be very important. Oh, did she disappear? Are you still there, Dr. Amber? IT in the background. Do we know where Dr. Amber went?
Hello. So maybe the connection, he was losing his connection.
Okay.
He's
Then
not connected.
I'll wait and see if she comes back.
Yeah, no problem. I think we can edit the video. No problem. So
Okay.
yeah,
I'm about to say, because is that going to affect your interview? Okay.
you record. You started the recording, right? So yeah, maybe back.
Okay. All right. We didn't know what happened. I said, uh-oh,
Yeah,
did it?
I lost internet connection, apparently.
Oh, okay.
So
Perfect. And
apologize.
the IT person was in the background. Make sure that we are still good now that she's back on and that record is back enabled. Just tell us when we're good and we'll jump right back in.
The last thing I heard you say was servant leadership.
Okay. That's what I wrote down for
You need to
myself.
touch on that concept.
Yes, I see the record button on my side, so I'm going to go with it and let's keep going. So let's just start that part over so they'll be able to make a clean edit chop. So, Dr. Amber, tell us more about servant leadership.
Well, I think the concept of servant leadership is fantastic, right? The concept itself states that we as leaders are making sure that people have what they need to do their jobs. But the word serving has a lot of connotations, particularly for women, right? Anytime we label ourselves as a servant or put our leadership style in a perspective that makes us look like our only job is to serve others, then you're subconsciously kind of setting the expectation that you are here to do someone's bidding. And when you're a senior leader, that changes things a bit. So I always encourage people to think of a different word, right? Support is a great word, or team players is a great word. But every time we repeat this statement over and over that we're serving, that becomes the expectation of the people in our orbit. In the end, the way that I lead is that we define a common goal. Everybody on the team has a part of reaching that goal, but my role as a senior leader is to facilitate. It is not to serve. It is just not a great word, and it has too many meanings in our culture. So I always ask people to take it off their LinkedIn profile, right? That is not, think really about who you are and what you stand for and use those exact words and be a bit more specific. Buying into certain concepts because you think that they sound really great may not be what you actually mean. And weaning ourselves off of cliches as we're trying to define and develop what women as leaders need to be in today's society, you'll find that you're going to start using different terminology.
That was something that when you were speaking to me about it, it kind of touched me in a way that, like you said, sometimes it makes you one step under that peg, one step under, or how people lean so much on us because me and you were previously talking about the burnout. And so I think sometimes that servant mentality can lead to our burnout. And we've also talked about women in leadership as well, and just in healthcare in general. And that, I like that. I think I'm going to actually, because I want people who are watching, who are inspiring leaders or who are in leadership to just have some change of perspectives. And that's one that I think,
It's a big
take that
one.
off the list. I love that. I love that.
Really upset about it because they've been taught all their lives that that is your goal. Well, maybe it is. For some people, that might be your goal. But for most leaders, it isn't. For most leaders, it is achieving what your mutual objective is. And your role is not just to serve. Your role is to help innovate, to push people. Your role is to step in when things are derailing. And that requires that you figure out how you influence, that you figure out how much you care about that and what you're willing to do to get there. And sometimes you have to make really hard decisions. You have to replace people, or you have to move in a different direction, or you have to put boundaries and barriers up. But if your reputation is one where you are in the background or where you're serving, then you're never going to have the seat at the table. So how you talk about yourself matters, not just with the word serve, but just in general. Learning how to describe what you do, what you're capable of, what you stand for, what matters to you, and sticking to that, that is what creates your brand as a leader. And that's a difficult thing for women in general. There's a ton of research of where women lead differently than men. And women perform almost identical to the way men perform, except for a few key areas. And those areas are not as strong because of how we are raised in this culture. And the number one place where women do not perform as strong as men do is in innovation. And the reason for that is that in our culture, we prize conformity, particularly in young women, right? We're all dressed the same as bridesmaids and we'll wear our hair the same and we'll want to be a certain image and do the same thing. And so we're really encouraged to conform to a certain ideal. Whereas when we raise young men, we tend to encourage them to take risks and to dare. And that early foundation is the difference between people who feel very comfortable innovating and pushing new ideas and people who are concerned about conforming. The opposite of conformity is courage. And so one of the things that I've built into every job description in my organization for senior leaders, for nurse leaders, is courage. That is a foundational quality I look for. And I ask that question in interviews. Tell me about something you did that took courage. And it's a different way for women to think because it's not usually a quality that we focus on, but it's essential if you're going to lead something. Because leadership is interesting, right? And change management in particular. There's an old cartoon, where the figure in the front says, "Who wants change?" And everyone in the room raises their hand and says, "I want change." And the next question is, who wants to change? And almost 2/3 of the hands go down because those people don't want to change. They just want the thing to change magically. And then the last slide is, who wants to lead the change? And there's no one left. Because we all know that the person who's leading the change, who's moving people from their comfort zone, you're not going to be liked, right? You're not going to have people jumping up and down to help you. So that's a skill set. Managing change and learning how to lead it. Your title has nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter where you are in your rank or any of that. It's a skill set that you learn that you use every single day. It's learning how you influence, and it's learning how people work, what human behavior is essential to change, and then learning over time how to be really effective and efficient and shorten it each time because you've learned how to do it. And you have to commit to it because it's not a great way, for you to feel like you're part of the crowd or that you're conforming to something. You're going to be that person who's taking that stance, and it does require courage.
Before you dive, I just made some connections from what you just said when we were talking before about fear. And you said that's one of your key things that you ask new employees or people you're interviewing about courage. And I do believe people are really struggling with the imposter syndrome and the fear part because they don't want to have the courage. And who wants to stand in the front and get all of the grunt of that? But they want the change, but they don't want what comes with all of that. So I think you just put that together. And I love how you said with the women's struggles, I'm doing this just for the note takers. And so you said women struggle with innovation. And then you said there was a couple more. What was the other two things that we struggle with as women?
It's accountability. We tend to want to keep pushing really hard, and we feel strongly that with mentorship, we can fix something. And sometimes we need to act faster there because we forget that the ultimate goal in our case in healthcare is safe patient outcomes, and we shouldn't compromise on that. I was recently reminded by one of our senior CNOs of a saying that I think is really impactful, right? If you can't change the people, change the people. And we tend to hesitate there. The other component of women in leadership is that we tend to take on the brunt of DEI work. We tend to take on the brunt of mentoring, of community-facing work. And so we add a lot to our plate because we feel that those are necessary, but those are often unpaid and unscheduled duties that add to our burnout. And so setting boundaries around that is important. Another component of that is that there's a cultural expectation that women do it all, that we care for our families, that we work, that we take time with our kids when it's important. And so the cultural expectation and the courage to say, well, I decide to do it differently. I decide not to go to soccer games, right? My husband does that. I'm going to be at work. And that's what I love to do. And really feeling confident that that's okay. And being comfortable with the judgment people have because their idea of what women should do gets in the way of you actually doing it. And so I always tell people how I choose to spend my time, how much of that is work and how much of that is family is up to me. The question's rude when you ask me about work-life balance, and I'm unapologetic about it. And then we're moving on. That is not a question anyone would ask a man, but we get stuck in a trap of believing that we have to be it all and have to do it all. You can't be. If work is what you love to do and that's where you want to spend your time and you figure out how to run your life around that, own it.
That's the stage I'm in, and that's what I tell people. I own it and I do what needs to be done. I'm a mother as well and a family person and high stress career. It is. Whew, that was really, really good. You've already flew through some of the questions, so I'm just kind of letting us flow. You've answered that, and I really loved how you talked about the women's struggles, but also bringing it all back full circle for leadership. Period. I'm going to move on to our next stage, so we can just keep this going. I would say, what innovations or initiatives are you the most proud of leading, and what measurable impact have they had?
Yeah, there are a few, big ones that throughout your career. And sometimes it was as a hospital president, and sometimes it was as a nurse or a nurse practitioner now in this role. All of them evolve around the impact that it had on the patient, right? I mean, in the end, what matters to me, what motivates me, and in the end, what matters the most to everybody is that you're improving care along the way.
Yes.
Currently, what I'm really excited about is what's happening with tech and AI, and not as a staffing solution, but as a care model change. Learning how to take a whole bunch of stuff and work off the plates of care providers, nurses, everybody who touches the patient, and focusing on what type of healing environment that creates. That's really exciting. And seeing some really good successes in that world and taking nurses along with us and pushing them to innovate. Again, that is the place where we tend to struggle a bit. Sometimes that's because we put barriers in place to allowing nurses to innovate. But removing those barriers and getting people at the table, you will find some extraordinary use cases for tech and AI. I set a list of guiding principles for change management for nursing in my organization. And all those things have to be true before we make a decision on how we move forward. And I put nurse well-being on there because if there's an initiative that we're working on for a different reason, if it doesn't improve nurse well-being, there is no point in pushing that through. And it's not that hard to work a little longer and a little harder and also make sure that it includes nurse well-being improvement. And so setting a goal for yourself in change management and pushing through that, that's pretty exciting because now you're going to get to some interesting solutions. The other part of that is that you have to have the commitment from everyone in your system that you're not going to do what other systems are doing. We are wired to wait until someone works the kinks out and tells us that there's an ROI, return on investment, right? Some
Yeah.
financial benefit. And then we're going to have them package it up and then we're going to do it. Someone has to lead. Someone needs to start. And so I told everybody, this is new. No one's done this yet. There's no best practice. And I don't want to solve the problems of another organization. I want to solve the problems of our own organization. And it requires that we, from the ground up, innovate together. And we have now come up with things that are best practices in the industry. And so that is really exciting. And, but just part of the way that I tend to lead anyway. You will develop best practices if you're willing to include everybody and be comfortable doing it a different way.
Yes. I think that also starts from how you started with midwifery and the things that you had to learn being out in the field, as you said, in doing rural areas. You had to there was no blueprint. You became the blueprint. And so you're like, hey, we're going to just get it done. So I can see how that leads you into where you are now. Wow. All right, let's move on to the next thing. We're going to talk about challenges and lessons learned. So I would say, how do you prioritize resilience, well-being, and professional development for yourself and your teams? Because we're going to play off of you talking about this AI and innovation thing.
I appreciate the way that question was asked because that's the correct way to ask the question, right? There's not an expectation of how I do it. You're just curious. So I work hard and I play hard. And so I can go for weeks straight, including the weekends, because there's always a gala or a walk or something else I need to do. And my own well-being, I listen to my body and I know that I need to, shut my brain off for a minute. And so I am a solo hiker. I go off in the woods by myself. And people always say, does that relax you? It doesn't. It actually hones your instincts because if it's just you and a bunch of mountain lions by yourself, you really, so you're doing like a
Looking
reset.
around, you're aware.
Yeah, you're doing a reset button on your nervous system. But because there's no other input, there is a relaxation that I get from that. So I think I'm always looking for, situations that are challenging. That's what I like to do. I think I'm much more intentional for the well-being of the people in my orbit and the people who I work with every day, and make sure that they do take that time and do whatever it is that they need. And what I've learned is, because I don't take much downtime for myself, sometimes it makes people hesitant in my orbit to take downtime. So there'd be some sort of judgment from me. So I'm being better about being very visible when I do take care of myself, so that I give others permission and feel like they don't need to feel guilty when they do it. I think it's very different for every person. But I think if we allow that difference and allow people to do that their way, then you get a really productive team that gets done what you need to get done in the first place. So there's no hard and fast rule. And there are times where I need more time than others. But overall, I just like to keep going.
I love that. You sound a lot like me, so that's why when I'm nodding, I'm like, yes, yes. Listening to your body, that's so key. And I do a lot of relaxation alone. Like I reset alone because I feel like
Right.
I'm so inundated with so much input. Sometimes I just need that, like you said, resetting your nervous system. I think that was excellent, because this is more of my specialty of what I do outside of the nursing magazine. So I love how you said listening to your body. And then also you said modeling. Meaning, a lot of times people are so used to me going, and all the things that I'm doing. And so then they feel weird to like step back because they don't want to. So I like that you are also incorporating, not judging them, but trying to model a little bit that it's okay to play hard but also rest hard. And those were very important things that you said that I think is going to help people who are climbing the leadership ladder but also trying to find a way to have harmony. I don't feel like we always have balance
There isn't.
because life shifts so much, and as we get older, things change, families change, bodies change, and we have to be able to just flow with the ebbs and flows of life
And
as
being
we have that.
unapologetic about that, right? It's when you start to feel yourself depleted, or you don't feel as clear, or you start to wonder about something every day. That's the cue. Not when you get sick, or not when you feel like crying every day. It's way earlier than that. And so then feeling confident enough to saying, I'm canceling all my meetings for the next 2 days, and not feeling guilty about that, that's tough, because you feel like, responsible, and the owner of that, and you're inconveniencing a whole lot of people. But that's what you have to do, so that you can keep going, moving forward. And when you're a leader, particularly senior leader, every day is busy, every day is crazy. And at some point, you have to set the boundary. And I have never encountered it where I changed the plans for the coming 2 days because I needed to go do something different, or anybody got upset about it. They're just like, okay, we're
So they're
rescheduling a
not.
meeting. We sometimes overthink, right? That people are judging us for taking care of ourselves. They're not. They're not even questioning it. All they know is that their meeting changed on their calendar. So just do it and take care of yourself.
Our conversation is just full circle, goes back to that whole servant thing. I think sometimes we just so
Exactly.
used to serving, so we don't want to let people down, so we still want to show up. And they're like, just go take your time or do the things you need to do. Wow, that's really, really
And,
good.
and the funny thing is, we don't expect it from other people. We only expect it from ourselves. Right. Nobody else expects us to do that. And so once that light bulb goes on and you realize that you stay true to what's important to you, otherwise you will burn out, right? Um, and set those goals for yourself, then you keep going until you hit them. And you don't stop, and you pivot when you need to. And if you need a break, you take a break. And that's just how life's going to work for the rest of your career.
I love
Yeah.
that. I call that the permission to pause. Just give yourself permission, talking about
Permission
internally,
pause.
that grace, that permission. Because nobody, like you said, nobody's saying anything. It's really your internal narrative. That's so good. All right, let's advance the nursing profession. What opportunities do you believe exist to strengthen academic practice partnerships and prepare the future nursing workforce?
Yeah, one of the things that I see a lot is that the expectation nurses have does not meet the reality. They come out of school, they come into the healthcare system, and it is an absolute shock. It's a shock of who our real patients are, how they behave, um, how you work within that system, where your voice is, and all the stuff that you thought you were going to do is not really what you're doing. It's really difficult to watch that. And so a couple things need to happen. We have to create work environments that are sustainable, where people can come in and actually do the things that they love to do. We need to understand what that is. What did you really want to do? And how can your system work on creating an environment where you get to do that thing? That's literally my job most every day, is how do I create work environments that people want to work and be cared in. One of the things that you can do and that we're working on now is to connect with nursing programs early to set a more realistic expectation. We learn from the students in that. The students get a better understanding and a better preparation coming in. But what's going to change is that nursing scope is going to continue to increase. Our patients are going to get sicker, right? All the implications of HR1, the law that's recently passed, we're going to see fewer people with insurance, which means we get more sick people who didn't get care, and we're just going to be busier. Nurses are taking care of incredibly complex patients. Being a nurse today is not the same as it was 20 years ago. People are sicker, they're living longer, we're doing a great job keeping people alive, but we need to work in a much more difficult, challenging, complex environment. And we've put more and more administrative burden on nurses, so they're not able to just focus on that clinical care. There's a nursing shortage. You can debate that, right? The nurses are there. They don't want to work this way. So a lot of the work is in learning how people want to work, learning what will be sustainable in the future, and then working with technology and AI to take over all those things that we don't need to be doing. AI can do audits. AI can, tell you when your patient's about to fall. It's a phenomenal tool, but we've all had to do massive, rapid learning because it's new and constantly evolving. That's the exciting part right now about change management. But it needs to come from the front lines. And if we don't talk to the nurses who are currently students who are coming in and listen to their expectation of what they want their workday to look like and what they really love to do, then we're going to miss the boat. So everybody needs to be at the table today to help innovate this. And so far, that's been extremely successful.
I think that's so key because even when I'm not doing nurse anesthesia, but as I've even noticed in my 20 plus career, is these patients are becoming sicker. I've also do a lot of mentorship, but when we have, how would I say, we facilitate and have a lot of staff that come through our organization. So we're always doing some training. And what I've been doing is going back into the nursing schools. And as you said, starting at that level and setting the expectation of what to expect when you get here and helping to mold. Because I think, once again, back to that servant thing you talked about, because like I said, I talk about workplace sustainability and resilience, but it's like a lot of things we weren't really shown. We're going by this textbook, and that's really not real life. And that's also not how people want to work. And I love the fact of you saying how we can use AI for innovation and how there's some different ways we can incorporate that to take off of some of the administrative things, because I think that's where people get boggled down and they're not able to really take care of these sicker patients and things could be missed. And then that turns into a whole thing. And we already know what the rest shows through the data. But that servant thing.
That servant thing, I know you're going to be thinking about it all day. And you almost kick yourself when your light bulb goes on, right? I talk about yourself matters and you set the expectation with others. I think there's an interesting misconception in senior healthcare leadership ranks that nurses don't want to work at the bedside because so many nurses are leaving the bedside. And I tell people that is untrue. Every nurse would love to work at the bedside, but not the way we're working today. It's the way we're working today. This is a solvable problem. If you can boil the problem down to that simple context, and really listen to how they think it's better, then build it to make it that way, right? If you need 2 hours back in your day because you want to be able to get to know your patient or sit with them when they just need you to be there with them for whatever reason, then that's what we need to do. And so if you don't approach it that way, you're going to make really bad decisions with tech and AI. So we made a commitment not to change staffing ratios. We made a bunch of commitments that we're not going to waver from. It's all about healing environment for the patient. And that means you're tracking, for example, how often we walk into a patient room. On average in the US, it's 85 times in a 15-hour waking period. We're opening that door. So that alone, it's disruptive for your nursing teams because they're the ones getting up and walking in. We know that almost 45% of that is nurses walking in. It's also tough on the patient who's trying to get rest. So sometimes when you're solving for the healing environment and for the work environment, everything else will fall into place. So we've had to think that way. And our nurses are coming up with really innovative ideas that help improve the experience of the patient. And we've in fact seen a massive increase in our patient experience since we listened to our nurses and used AI and tech in the way they're asking us to use it.
Wow, that's really, really good. You've already hit on some of these things here. Let's see. What emerging trends should today's nurses and healthcare leaders be preparing for?
Yeah, I think obviously tech and AI, but I'm going to skip over that because that's true for everybody in the nation, right? We're all learning how to work with that together. I think what nurses really need to be prepared for is that will require an increase in their skill set and an expansion of their scope. I already find myself pushing for top of scope work for nurses, particularly in rural areas or areas where we may not have the same access to resources. So nurses are going to do more and more and more things that traditionally we didn't think nurses should be doing. I do think we should be doing that. And our nurses are telling me they want to do it. And so breaking down the barriers so that nurses can do things that were traditionally in the realm of the physician, that's been going on in nursing for 50 years, but that's going to continue to increase. And the more we work together and partner together and break out of these super hierarchical relationships, the better you feel about coming to work every day and the better it is for the patient. So that's something to prepare for. You'll always be learning. You'll always start expanding on your basic skill set. And you're going to be doing things in 10 years that you couldn't have dreamt of today.
That is very, very important. All right, let's see here before we get ready to wind down on our conversation. I would say, outside of your professional responsibilities, what activities or interests help you maintain balance and purpose? So we talked about our walking, we talked about those things. Are there any other things you would suggest to potential leaders or leaders that you would think that they should think about doing to maintain for balance and purpose?
Yeah, I think you need to surround yourself with people who support you and your purpose. There is no easy nursing job. That doesn't exist. And if you do not have an environment around you where people pick you up when you need a break or where, you don't have time to decompress, that becomes really, really difficult. So making sure that your home life matches your work life and that you do have the ability to relax and to drop some of the trauma, which is what you're going to experience every day, and the burdens of the reality of the care of the sickest people among us. If that's not there, you have to create it, and you have to prioritize it, and you have to insist on it. So I think that's really important. You can't separate the two. You're going to bring your work home with you, and all of us are exposed to trauma every single day, or hear about it, or know about it. That makes nursing and healthcare careers very different than the rest of the population. And we need to be better about separating out. I'm going to trigger you now a little bit, burnout from trauma resolution, because I think we confuse the two. We have normalized experiencing trauma and turning right back around and going, put a smile on your face and go in the next room and do something different. And we never stop and slow down and say, how are we managing that today? Right? What do we do to check in with you? There's a story kind of going around and I just heard it again on a meeting that I was on. There was an instance where we had a really bad outcome, and everybody in the hospital ran to go and help, and everybody ran to the patients and the family, and I ran to the anesthesiologist that had been in the case, and I found the anesthesiologist in the back hallway, devastated, and I sat and hugged the anesthesiologist. Okay, I knew that our teams would take care of the family and the patient and everybody else. We forget that the person who's responsible for whatever happened often is just kind of
Stuff.
either forgotten. We don't acknowledge that they experienced that trauma as well. And they felt responsible because they were running that room. And so honing in, so people always say, are you the CEO that hugs anesthesiologists? I'm like, yep, that's me. And it's because, in the midst of the chaos and the trauma, we forget that the people at the bedside are the ones who feel it just as acutely as everybody else. And so figuring out how to do that and how to allow people to process their trauma, to normalize saying go home and having enough staffing to make that possible so that you can come back the next day and still be human, that you don't just kind of get in this place where, you get compassion fatigue, which is a terrible thing to feel.
That's what I had. Yes.
Caring. And then you
Mhm.
feel guilty about it. And so compassion fatigue comes from unresolved trauma. And if we process unresolved trauma, we're less likely to burn out. I tell new grads, that you need to be yourself. We teach you to create a healthy boundary and to not get involved. No, get involved. Be a human being in the space. If it's sad and you feel like crying, I need you to cry. If you need to hug your patient, hug your patient. I remember having to crawl into bed with a patient and hold her and tell her that her baby didn't make it. That is what you would do for your loved ones. So do the same thing for your patient, because if you start processing emotions and trauma differently just because you're a healthcare provider, you're hurting yourself. And you're also harming the people in your environment, because over time, that compassion fatigue has a significant impact on patients.
You're hitting on all the things that I teach on and that I've went through. And as a nurse anesthesiologist, I can 100%, and I can say I've never had anybody give me a hug through that, but I have spoke out that we should have debriefings, even if they just pull that room, because it's not always just the anesthesia team there. You have the whole operating room, but can we debrief about that? Because normally we have to go on to the next case, or there's something else that needs us. So we don't really get that minute to like breathe. It's kind of like, and then keep going. And then you bring it home. So like it still sits, it festers. And I love how you talk about that. And I think that's empathy and kindness. When I really unpack compassion fatigue for myself, I really understood it was a boundary still jumping in there, but having compassion, but having the empathy and kindness with it for myself, but also understanding my limitations and processing in real time. Because that delayed grieving of whatever happens throughout our day, especially when we're at the bedside or we're in the operating room, it does sit with you. And I always find myself being in the challenging cases. I like to be in all the nitty gritty. Those are the type cases I'm always in. And it's already a heightened expectation when I'm going in there, because I know we're doing a life-saving surgery on you anyway. So I'm praying that it goes well, but you may even die and it's not even our fault. It's just we know what's going on in the case. So it's very easy to, I sometimes call my patients like my baby. Like I really, when I take care of you, you are like, I'm going to treat you like that all the way through the process. And sometimes I feel like over my career it has hindered me emotionally, because you can take it on so much, but just finding a way to, I don't want to say just deal with it, but finding a better way to process it.
That needs to be normalized in healthcare. So yeah, I've made that part of every role I've had, and that has been extremely successful. Right, building spaces where people can decompress, bringing in yoga for lunch. It's little things sometimes, and it's not the activity; it's the message that your leadership understands that you're walking around with a bunch of stuff, and that we're doing everything we can to tell you, I see you, I thank you, but I need you to go take care of yourself and process that, because downstream, the impact on everybody is detrimental. We're getting better about it, but we need to speak it out loud and need to help people avoid this, not just burnout, but just walking around just feeling terrible every day. It's not good for anybody. And there's no reason for it. There are no situations where we can't just slow down for a minute and make sure that we pay attention to that. And that's just a culture shift, but it is getting a lot better.
I love that. I think, like you said, the culture shift is really, sometimes people don't feel comfortable. It goes back to your original thing about who wants change, but nobody wants to stand and put their hand up to do it. And when you start speaking, talking about if you're not in leadership, but you're speaking to leadership, some people feel inadequate or not comfortable to speak on those things because they don't know what the backlash may be.
Your leadership cares about your patients, and your leadership cares that you're happy where you work and that you're going to stay there, right? And so the things that matter to your leaders when you're trying to have a conversation around change aren't always the things that people show up with. So there is something called, it used to be called the triple aim, now it's a quadruple aim. We've got now 5 key points that matter in, when you're driving change in healthcare. And it needs to create an efficiency. It has to improve the engagement of your team. It has to improve the quality of care and engagement of the patient. There's a whole slew of things that need to be true before we put a whole lot of effort into change. But what we as nurses tend to do when we go to a senior leader is we talk about things that improve the environment, right? Something that makes people happier. There's very little value that you can tie to that when you're a financial person. There's always a value. You just need to come with that when you have a conversation. You need to think about what's important to that person And it's not just about your senior leader, it's about anyone when you're driving change. Figure out what they care about, find your common goal, and then come with your idea. People will say we could get a piano and then we could get a different water bar with different flavored fruits and all of those things, right? That's great. But what does that actually make better? You need to come with something that makes everything better. And that is possible. And when you do that, people hear you better. They hear you better. The other thing I teach people all the time is that you have to be really good. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see me say it, right? My next book is going to be called What's Your Problem? Because people have a hard time figuring out the actual problem. They know exactly what part they're really unhappy about, and they focus on fixing that thing, but that may not be the problem. Learning how to get to the core of the problem and then tackling that and putting your energy in that's what's going to then move the needle on everything else. So that could be a whole nother session of figuring out what the real core problem is, but that is worth learning. There's a process that you can learn to really hone into the root of the problem versus what you're emotional about or what you believe to be true. So once you get to the core of the problem and present a solution to it, people are going to listen to you.
You just helped someone there. That was really, really good. We're going to move to we're closing this thing on out. So finally, what I want to talk about is how would you like to be remembered as a nurse leader? So as your legacy, how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as somebody who never forgot why we do it, and that I never waver or compromise on the care of the patient. No matter what comes our way or what initiatives need to happen or cost savings, if it's not right for the patient, I will stick my ground. And I've never been able to resolve it, or never been able to not resolve it with that stance, right? You can get to a resolution without compromising the care of your patient or how we treat people. So I think it's that unapologetic commitment and never wavering from that stance. I have never agreed to any kind of decision that wasn't the right thing to do for people. So I hope I'm remembered for that person who just never compromised on that.
All right, they have a lightning round here, so this is going to be quick, and then we're going to close this thing on out, and we just want to thank you so much. So lightning round, here we go, okay? So just answer with the first response that comes to your mind. What's one word that describes your leadership style?
Impact.
Ooh. The best leadership advice you've ever received?
Don't delay action.
A book that has influenced your leadership?
Crucial Conversations.
One habit that contributes to your success?
Hiking.
That is a good one. A
Yeah.
healthcare innovation you've most excited about?
Virtual nursing.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Early bird or night owl?
Early.
And your favorite way to recharge outside of work, which I know is hiking, but what's your favorite way to recharge outside of work?
My women friends, connecting with other women who are in leadership positions, turning our phones off and really feeling, like we can connect with one another and support one another. I love doing that.
We love connection. Connection is always a good thing. Is there any key words you want to leave us with before I go ahead and close us out?
No, I always like focusing on, what's that thing that you would tell everybody, to start thinking about, and that's really developing your courage. Once you develop that and realize that nothing bad happens when you're courageous, everything gets easier for you if change management is part of what you're wanting to achieve.
Develop your courage. That could even be a good title for this episode. So I want to thank you for sharing your leadership journey with the Nurses Magazine. Your insights, your experiences, and your vision will inspire nurses and healthcare leaders across the nation and around the world. The Executive Chair is where nursing leadership inspires the future. And the Nursing Magazine is in elevating nursing, inspiring leadership, transforming healthcare. People who are watching, please make sure you subscribe and also get the magazine. We have quarterly magazines. We just had our Men of Honor and we just did our Nurses Week spring edition, and that was awesome. So please make sure you do that. My name's Jineen R. Huff. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Make sure you follow us on all our social media platforms. And I want to thank Dr. Amber Price for being here and being on the executive chair. We're going to close out. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.